Thanks again for having me. Excited to kind of jump into this. So I grew up here in New York. Got interested in coding when I was like 10 or 11. I had a bunch of different WordPress blogs growing up, but one for basketball, one for food, and I was just trying to customize them. And so I learned how to like customize the CSS on these, WordPress templates, and that led me deeper into like learning HTML, CSS, JavaScript. And actually, there was this one moment I like read this book. Without their permission from Alexis Ohanian, who's the Reddit co-founder and runs a VC firm. And that was like my first exposure to not just like, oh, you can, I don't know, code to like customize your WordPress blog, but like what does Silicon Valley mean? What does it mean to have a startup for you to be able to like share these ideas really quickly? And like the combo of like learning some really basic coding as a kid and getting an eye into like what that all actually means, that like set me on a course where I knew this was like what I really wanted to do. And I, kind of just like kept learning things as a kid. But the thing that like really kind of like drew me to where I am now is that one of the before iOS came out with these widgets where you can now see, your notes, your calendar, etc. I made an app like that a while back to, bring in data from different sources. So you can have your mail, your calendar, news, all on one little page at a glance. That led me down a rabbit hole of thinking about why isn't it easier for me to kind of access and organize my data from across different sources? You have all these different accounts online, and the only interfaces, unless you use an API, which is normally pretty closed, it's interface designed by the same designer for everyone in the world to use. And I just kept going even further down the rabbit hole of like desktop metaphors, why we can't connect all this data, why the way we use the computer from an interface perspective never really changed to reflect a shift away from like local files and folders to stuff that we're doing online. And all of that is what led me to like first realizing what crypto can do, not just like what crypto means for tokens or money, but that you could actually have these cryptographic signatures that make it easy to attest that you own data or to actually like own the underlying data. And yeah, so I was really in at first into like the IPFS cryptography side, and there was even some work Tim Berners-Lee, the founder of the web, was doing in a related way of like how do you have these personal pods of data you own. To speed the story up a little bit, after I graduated high school, after my first year of college, I guess, I interned at a VC firm called Chapter One, which is amazing. And I had just found out about Farcaster like a couple months or so before. This was summer of 2022. And Chapter One was also a small part of the first, like Farcaster, I guess it was a seed round. And so that summer, I was just going really deep into what's going on with decentralized social. There was this like, ceramic protocol with Orbis I was looking at the time, Lit protocol. I also met a lot of really cool folks then who I still know today. Like shout out Yash Bora, who was at Chapter One at the time, and also shout out Matt from Splits and Eventcaster, who got me onto Farcaster. And yeah, just that summer is when I fully got like even more immersed into crypto, even more into Farcaster, really just like buying into what it can mean. And from there, even though I was already kind of in college, I, took a gap semester after my first year to focus more on crypto stuff. I ended up kind of transferring to a school that was in LA, thinking it would maybe make it easier for me to be around tech stuff. I was at George Washington in DC before, and where it ended up was that I, did work at a bunch of different startups along the way, and ended up dropping out about a year or so ago, partially because the school I transferred to didn't take any of my old credits, and also I was pretty deep into doing work at a bunch of different startups. I guess at that time, especially Nanar, had started doing work with them, and that was kind of the most recent like big gig that led me to the work I'm doing now at Base. And so yeah, like that's kind of like the natural evolution of it. I would say that what I did most recently at Nanar and what I'm doing now at Base are probably like the two most exciting or biggest things that I've done so far in my career, and very like fortunate for both of them. And being on Farcaster has done so much for me in terms of a network, people to be able to meet, especially at times where I wasn't in school as much. Really great ideas and access to people with those ideas, and being able to build up this repertoire of projects that have led me to work with some amazing startups and people, and now here with Base. So just, yeah, really thankful for what this has all brought me, and excited about the future that we can all build together. Happy to dive into any of that.
Yeah, no, that's great. I appreciate the story. And I didn't realize from, just interacting on Farcaster and whatnot, like how young you were, that you just dropped out of school and everything. So it's really cool to hear. And, it seems like you're really sort of, moving quickly and making an impact in crypto quickly, relatively after sort of getting into it and starting to just, you know, drink from the fire hose and get involved, especially with a lot of these Farcaster related projects like Nanar. When you made that decision to drop out, was that something that you had been sort of like thinking about for a while and finally decided to take the leap, or was it something that sort of came about sort of suddenly? Like, was that like sort of an easy thing or a difficult thing for you to do?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely like a bubbling decision for a couple of years, even back to when I was a senior in high school. There was this startup that was trying to get me to forego my high school graduation and join them. And looking back, I'm very glad I didn't do that. I'm glad I at least have a high school diploma, and also that company in particular. I'm just glad I didn't join, although hope those guys are still doing well. But yeah, I mean, for a while, I knew this is what I wanted to go to, and I knew that there was a bit of a disconnect between the comps I was learning in high school and college and the stuff I was into. And not even from a crypto perspective, but more so there are things like using React as a framework, building websites, understanding how fast you iterate, using tools like Git, some of these things where the comp sci education I received was a little bit, just further away from that. And that doesn't, I don't mean to say that to discredit other things you can learn from a traditional comp sci perspective. I just like I wasn't fully getting that gap bridged, and most of the learning I was doing was online through building projects or websites like Free Code Camp, which are amazing resources for folks. So it was really just a matter of over a couple years, like what that back and forth looked like with my family, and getting to a point where I understood like the college stuff was going to take a lot longer, especially with the new school I was at not taking my credits, and having a bit more legitimacy with startups like Nanar, where I could see a little more of a path of where the career was going. So it was a little bit like back and forth for a couple of years, but I think when I made the decision, like everyone around me was pretty comfortable with that, and I felt a lot better making it. And also, yeah, just like very fortunate for people who've supported me through that journey.
What was it that you were primarily doing at Nanar, and how did that all sort of come to be? Because I feel like Nanar has been, one of these relatively few companies that has sort of established itself as like there's enough of a need there. Because like Farcaster is so many builders, and there's a lot of people trying to like build for consumers, but like all the consumers on Farcaster are also builders. Like that's obviously an over I'm rounding up a lot
Yeah,
or
sure.
whatever, an exaggeration, but generally speaking, I think that is like sort of a legitimate thing, and we haven't sort of broken Farcaster out into sort of that next, um, group or whatever it is. There's just like, and it's a good thing that there's so many builders. Like I think it's very bullish for the network and for base and for everything. But it still is true, and so Nanar, has this product that is very much built for and used for and kind of needed by builders, and so it feels like they're, I mean, I don't know like the details or anything, it feels like they're doing super well. But how'd you come to work with those guys, and what were you primarily doing over there?
Yeah, no, they definitely deserve all the praise. They jumped on a space really early and have capitalized it and listened a lot to what developers and others are saying. So I knew about them for a while back when they were still at Coinbase, and they were building this like vertical scrolling Instagram stories, Snapchat style mobile app for like minting NFTs. And then summer of 2023, I guess, so like 2 summers ago now, or yeah, somewhere around then, they just like put up a website before Hubs had even launched, or maybe when Hubs were launching, and it was just like one click on Stripe and like buy access to a rented hub. And even with like a site that literally just had the Stripe link, they got a couple paying customers and grew conviction from there. And yeah, I was able to follow the fact that they wanted to listen to what developers were saying and like very intentionally build products for them. How I kind of got in touch with them is, I had tested these apps, seen them on Farcaster for a while. And then in the fall before I had joined them, I was building some projects on my own. I was doing Caster Scan. I was doing this thing called Farcaster Kit at the time, which used Warpcast or Merkle. They have this open source Postgres replicator where if you want, you can replicate data from hubs and sync it to your own Postgres database. And it's not as performant now because of how much data it has, but at the time you were able to sync whatever 100 gigabytes of data to your database. And so I wanted to make these hooks to make it a lot easier to just ingest data. And I think doing that kind of stuff caught their attention and seemed like there's a mutual interest of like, what if I was able to build some of these things I was building in my free time, but like purpose them as infrastructure for Nanar. And I was able to start working with them. I think it was literally only like 5 days or something after V1 Frames launched. And so the frame server itself was getting a lot of traffic. Nanar was getting a lot of traffic. Farcaster 10x'd in growth and created this like really exciting space for a couple months leading up to that FarCon. And I was able to just work on a bunch of stuff. Worked on Nanar Frame Studio, which is a online UI for making frames with like a Google Sheets like interface. When you think about V1 Frames having like different pages of state you navigate between, I worked on the developer dashboard where you get your API key and like see your compute units and all that kind of stuff. Worked on the docs, worked on the React SDK. So a lot more like front end facing stuff, and then also general developer questions like, hey, this isn't working, or do you guys have this feature available? But it was just awesome to be able to learn from them, to be able to have so much like face to face interaction with Farcaster builders who are building on Nanar. It was just like great in many different ways, and I really like respect them, and yeah, learned a lot during the time I was there.
And it seems like during the time you were working there as well, you were, obviously you were a student, but also you were building things independently. Do you have any sort of like favorite things that you've built over the years, Farcaster or otherwise?
Yeah, well, I think one is like Farhack and FarCon. I was part of like yeah, fortunate to be a part of last year's FarCon and this year's FarCon and kind of running Farhack there. Partially just like doing the software for that. So we have Farcaster native hackathon software as a frame where you can create a team, look at bounties, submit the bounty, etc. And kind of doing that from a software perspective, but also importantly from like a physical putting on the event perspective. That is like definitely one of the most rewarding things I've been a part of on Farcaster. Just like seeing the smiles on everyone's faces when they meet each other, when a project that they hacked in 24 hours gets the recognition of the 100+ people that show up on a Sunday, or I guess this year a Friday, to see their demos. That's definitely one of the most rewarding. One of the projects that I use the most is Caster Scan. So it's kind of like Etherscan for Farcaster. You can put in a cast hash and see some of the raw details, and there's a bit more for a while I've been wanting to build out there. And another one I guess I'll highlight, which kind of led me to Nanar in the first place, was Lightcast. So I'd always wanted to do some mobile stuff, but right before I joined Nanar, Dan from Farcaster had put up a bounty for like a React Native open source Farcaster client. And so I built a really, really simple one, like using sign in with Nanar and Farcaster data. And I never even ended up like doing a full launch or anything, but it's open source and some folks have forked it. And that one's been really cool. Yeah, just in terms of people forking it, having questions. But Caster Scan is the one that I've actually like used the most in terms of I use it like multiple times a week to debug stuff, which is really cool.
So what are you seeing when you put in like the cast hash and caster scan? Like what are the details that you're seeing? You mentioned like wanting to build out other stuff. Like what are the things you would want to see if you were building out more?
Yeah, so the way it's laid out right now is you go to the homepage and it's pulling a live feed of the latest cast directly from Hubs. So kind of like if you've seen, I don't know, videos of like the dashboard at the GitHub office where you see all of the commits from around the world coming in, like that kind of live stream of just, hey, here's a fire hose of all the casts. There's some stuff I could do to make the data a little more live. Live, the rendering isn't the best. And then when you put in a cast hash, it shows you all the details in terms of the cast text, the hash, the parent hash, the author FID, mentions, embeds. So like when you embed a frame, you don't see the link, you just see the embed. So this is helpful for like getting the URL. And then
Hmm.
also you can compare Nanar's API data, Warpcast API data, and then hubs from Nanar and Warpcast. So for example, maybe like Nanar index something one way, but Warpcast index it a different way, or Warpcast hub has it, but it hasn't synced to Nanar's hub yet. So that Nanar has their own version of something like this as well, Nanar Explorer, which is really cool. I think products like those are like really helpful for just getting real time data. And there's other stuff like every every message on the hub, I would want to have its own page. Right now, it just has cast hashes, but there's a hash for every message, whether it's a prune, a reaction, updating your profile. So it'd be cool to be able to go in and actually analyze, hey, like I don't know, Jake updated his profile. Here's where it happened. Here are the hubs that confirmed it, etc. So going a little deeper there in terms of just like analyzing different pieces of data.
Yeah, it sounds like, you've got like a lot of, I mean, you've built a ton, you've got a lot of ideas to do with the things that you've built, among other ideas I'm sure that you haven't had the chance to build. So I'm curious, like, given, how young you are, obviously there's a lot of benefit to being able to like work with other people who, do have more experience or larger companies or whatever, whether it's Nanar or, now Base. Congratulations, by the way, on joining Base. It's awesome.
Thanks.
And so I'm curious, like your sort of assessment of the pros and cons, just given where you are and your work life and whatnot, and what you've done today and hope to do in the future. Like your sort of view on the pros and cons, or the trade-offs of being able to sort of like hack and build things on your own versus joining a larger organization, and working with a team on sort of a larger thing.
Yeah, for sure. I think I have like a bit of a unique perspective on this because the past like year and a half or so, where I was still in school and figuring things out, I was kind of in this like general contractor area. I think it's great because you can have a bunch of different opportunities come your way and you wouldn't have expected them. And so I've got to work with like a lot of my closest friends, for example, and like their startups, and that is really awesome. I think sometimes the con is, especially if you're viewing it from a business perspective, you have to really have the business side of it actually lined up in terms of I'm doing this contract, what contract follows after that, am I making enough to be able to like sustain myself living, like thinking about full-time contracting as opposed to a job. The other thing that's great about it that I've really liked is you can just wake up one day and have a completely different idea, and if that idea like goes viral or does well, that's awesome. Like the tap video stuff, for example, happened because I was just like sitting there one day and the idea came out and took a night and went a lot more viral than most of my stuff does. And I like wouldn't have the flexibility to do that. Uh, but other than the financial aspect of like making sure you have it all strung out properly, and if you can do that and deal with all the like negotiations, etc., then more power to you. I think the biggest thing that was on my mind is like, where is this work going? Like I want to build consumer products that have traction, that people use, that generate new ideas. And you have to be very focused then in terms of where this is all going. This is something I'm trying to battle with as well. Is there's so much like low hanging fruit in the Farcaster crypto ecosystem to build, but where can I best align my interests and also time to get the most out of it? To not just build things to say, hey, like I closed the loop on that project, but to put effort there because you see the long term value. So I think that's the headspace I'm in right now, and that's part of why I'm also really excited about the work I get to do at Base. Is I get to continue to like level up and learn from a world class team and have an opportunity to ship to a large audience. And again, that isn't to discredit like going one way or another, but that's just kind of how I'm thinking about it in this stage of my life, and just trying to like get the most out of the chances I have right now.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. And I know, like when I first reached out for us to do this, it was actually from seeing the tap frame that you did, or the tap app, whatever you want to call it, like sort of videos in a frame on Farcaster. I thought that was really interesting. I was sort of waiting for someone to do that and was considering sort of working with a dev to do that myself. Just sort of seemed like a natural thing that could also spin out into its own client at a certain point if it had certain level of traction and whatnot. So curious sort of how that got off the ground for you. It sounds like it was quite a quick build on an idea that you had. And I know it's like sort of very much a V1. But are you, now I'm assuming you're pretty busy. I don't know, are you able to push that forward at all? Or would you be interested in seeing sort of like other people push something like that forward? Just sort of curious your thoughts on Tap.
Yeah, there are definitely a couple things I want to edit there. I think of all like the crypto or Farcaster projects, if I had to like choose one, that's the one I would like update the most right now, other than Farhack, just to like make sure we're all good for May, do some more testing. But yeah, so I said earlier how it came about. I guess the precursor to that is I was doing before that, Tap was more like Grok or Perplexity for Farcaster style of work. So, for those who maybe aren't familiar, OpenAI standardized this thing called function calling, which basically means you can give the model a list of different functions it can call and a description, and then it can fit a JSON schema, and the model can actually deterministically choose the input and then call something like an API and give you the data back. So I was curious if I could do something like this to analyze cast, analyze user profiles, and I have some cool stuff set up there. It can, get you Farcaster data. So we can say, like, what has Dylan been casting about lately? You can put in a cast hash or a warpcast URL. And then the part I haven't built out as much is this concept of different profiles. So using the function calling, I can also call Icebreaker, Clanker, Bounty Caster, all of these APIs of like apps that are Farcaster adjacent. And so something really cool I'd like to explore there is just like, what can you do for more of these interfaces and what actions can you take? Like, can I don't know, buy stuff on chain, kind of like Ask Gina or BankerBot? Can I, find people with similar profiles as me on Icebreaker? And then yeah, the video as I was talking about is kind of built into it. What I'm thinking about now is just like from the video perspective, can I clean the UI up a little bit? Um, are there any on-chain things that I could do? Like, do people want to mint the videos? I have a little tip in ETH widget. Should I maybe make that tip in Farcaster native tokens so it's easier to, show folks? And I've also been thinking about should I maybe add like an on-chain tab, like a similar vertical style tab, but for things you should mint or apps you should check out on chain. So there's kind of a lot there. I think the just updating the video tab is probably the highest ROI in terms of that's what people have been asking for. I probably have a couple hours a week I can do that. So I'm kind of organizing the plan. But also, if you feel very strongly about adding something to this, and I guess by you, I mean like anyone, the code is open source. So happy to accept any contributions and you can earn points on Scout Game too.
Yeah, I sort of, I mean, that all sounds like they make sense in terms of like next steps for Tap from where it is now. I sort of missed the bridge between how it went from more of like a AI thing to a video thing. What was like sort of the connection there?
Yeah, so I was doing the AI first, and I spent a while on it. Because I had a couple months in between Nanar and the work I'm doing now at Base, and so I spent a good like 6 weeks like fully building out the AI. And even though I say there's like optimizations, I'm like very happy about the state that it's in right now. And even though now there's like all of these new ideas that are coming to me, and there's still stuff I want to build in, I was maybe just like hitting a bit of a mental block where I was like, I've worked on the AI part for like 2 months straight. It hasn't got as much traction. Where am I going to go next? And the video thing just like happened really randomly. I forget what sparked it in particular, but I know I was sitting down one day and I thought of the Dracula app. I thought, why didn't they focus on just surfacing videos that have already been posted to Farcaster? There's something like someone did the analytics recently. It's like 300,000 videos or something insane. So I was just wondering,
Wow.
like, not as a dig to the work they're doing. I really respect Alex and the team, but I was just curious, like, why had no one done it in that sort of play? And then like the more I was thinking about that idea, the more I scratched, further into, oh, why can't you tip with Farcaster tokens? Why isn't this just a frame instead of an app? And then I was just like, oh, like this, I need to build this before someone else does. And then I already had all this infrastructure set up in the Tap repo, like all the Farcaster data, caching. It's a frame, and so I just added it there. And I think now it's cool because I can actually explore like, does Tap, I had joked that Tap means like traveling across protocols, but if I add like chat and on-chain stuff, like can it actually be there? I guess the TLDR is like it was the simplest place for me to add it, and the idea happened randomly, and I just wanted to execute. And I just got lucky that like when I put out that first demo, the cast went really viral, and then I tried to do something I'm not always as good at, which is like carrying the momentum of just, hey, Dan quote casted it and it did really well on the timeline today. Well, I should update it later, and then I should update it tomorrow, and keep it alive, sort of thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, it sounds like you have a pretty good excuse. You got, I think, hired by Base pretty shortly thereafter. So, you know, obviously your plate is probably pretty full right now. I know, you're working on. You probably can't talk about everything that you're working on over there, but and it's only been a little while, but any first impressions just of your experience joining Base?
Yeah, sure. Everyone's been super kind and friendly. It's an amazing team to work on. There's so much going on in so many different domains. I think personally, I'm really excited about the type of work I get to do and like how it fits in with my interests, and I'm just like trying to make the most of it every day. You know, excited for the moment where I can talk about it a little more. I think if you're on Farcaster, maybe you have some guesses as to what it might be, but you know, from the bird's eye view, I just view it as an opportunity where I get to learn so much from folks, like set myself up really well from a career perspective, and just yeah, make the most of that every day. And even so far in the couple weeks I've been here, I feel like so much has happened. There's been a lot to learn. So yeah, really excited about that.
Were you ever interested, or have you ever like, did you ever build stuff, elsewhere in crypto outside of Base, or was it mostly like sort of intro to crypto through Farcaster and then mostly building like on Base as a result of that?
I mean, I experimented a little bit with like Zora Chain when it first came out, a little bit with Optimism. I'm not really like a smart contract deployer, and most of the NFTs I've created have been like on the Zora app through Zora or Base Chain. I mean, I did stuff like back on mainnet as well. That was like mostly before the merge when I was like very first on Farcaster. I'd say a lot of it has been in the EVM community. I've definitely explored like Bitcoin and Solana, and especially how with Solana, there's been a lot more of a developer push in the past couple months. And so I'm trying to like not stay too much to one lane, but I certainly wouldn't be remiss if I didn't say that like there's been a special like, you know, place for me with the Ethereum community in terms of like the values there, what folks are building, and also just folks being super kind and everything. You know, not as a dig to those others. That's just like what I've found a lot in this community.
Yeah, no, it's I mean same from my perspective with my experience as well. It's just been I sort of and it's largely due to Farcaster really. I think if I was mainly on Twitter in terms of like social media, I'd probably be just as exposed to like Solana as Base or Ethereum at this point. But just as a sort of virtue of having been on Farcaster now for 2.5 years or something like that, and just enjoying spending time on Farcaster much more than Twitter. I just, you just end up doing a lot on Base. Built a couple projects on Base at this point, and most of the builders I know are building on Base, so it sort of happened, somewhat organically. Another thing I'm curious for your perspective on would be like, given how early actually were you on Farcast? Like, what was your FID roughly?
I'm FID 616.
616, nice. So super early. Having been on it for that long and, you know, been actively participating as a builder and everything, obviously casting and stuff as well. Do you have a perspective on sort of like how it has developed over your time on the network and what you think are sort of like the critical next steps for it to take, or maybe it's sort of good where it is and it doesn't have, any huge priorities that it sort of needs right now? I'm just curious your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, it's been really cool to see how much has changed in the past couple of years. I remember when I first joined Farcaster, there wasn't even a concept of hubs. There wasn't even a public API, and everything was on. It was either like Ropsten or Gurley Ethereum testnet. So to see everything flesh out from there, and also the app was called Farcaster as an Electron app. So to see all the different changes, and I remember even when they first created Warpcast and they did the name switch and they previewed the web version like a year and a half ago. Everything that seemed like it was going to be like a make or break moment for Farcaster, and just, yeah, like how much can change in that short amount of time. I really respect the way that the team has had this like product led development mindset of maybe doing things in a manner that seems more centralized, or not even more centralized, but just like not fully decentralized from the beginning, but understanding it's because they need to iterate from things from a product perspective, and it's hard to get product feedback and then change things on a protocol. I know it's something that they like have and continue to get flack for at times, but I think from like a mindset, they're thinking about it all in the right ways. And it's great that a lot of more serious teams are building on Farcaster, from us and what we're doing to other folks building clients or apps. It's all going to be a positive sum. I think Farcaster is thinking about the right things in terms of scaling, in terms of growing the pie of who's already there. I think what's on the back of my mind is how we continue to scale to folks who are just like new to crypto overall. We have a lot of really exciting tools we can use as a crypto community, or these Legos as developers refer them to. But it's almost a game of how you get someone to that aha moment where they understand that there's this community and this set of actions they can take that will be positive sum for them. And yeah, it's just really fun for us all to solve that, because there's just like so much more available to be able to do that from a UX perspective right now.
Yeah, I think your point on the sort of controversial, if that's the right word, stance that they've taken on certain things in regards to decentralization and whatnot. Like, this is, I think, something that, obviously the team there is from Coinbase, and I think Coinbase sort of similarly took this really controversial position early on in building Coinbase, which was that, like, they took this very sort of like anti-government, anti-regulation technology and industry at that point, and said, we're going to work hand in hand with regulators to try to, build something that regular people can use, that's sort of by the law and within the law and everything like that. And sure enough, that bet obviously ended up being a really good one. And I think Farcaster now sort of threading the needle on, how decentralized does this actually need to be? Are we being decentralized or doing things in a decentralized way for the purpose of, being decentralized without actually understanding why that's important? Or are we doing the things, that need to be decentralized in a decentralized way, and the things that don't need to be, in a more centralized manner, and just sort of like threading the needle on that. I don't know all of the details of, the various decisions there that are like sort of most important, but from a, high level sort of philosophical point of view, I think that sounds like it's probably the right approach, and sounds like you sort of agree with that.
Yeah, for sure. It's just, yeah, as I kind of said before, been really helpful to hear how much detail they go in when they explain all this different stuff, and how, not in a narrow minded way, but how consistent the stance has been throughout all the years of them doing this because they want this all to work for the long term. And at the same time, yeah, they've been very vocal. They've been very easy to reach and helpful. I think they're thinking about the right things that kind of set the protocol up to not only be decentralized, but to, yeah, in the same ethos, like work well for multiple clients. And it's just like great stuff for me as well, who, for someone who is really interested in how this is all going to look 10, 20 years from now, to be able to sit in on conversations where they're, changing things at the protocol level. I'm just trying to soak up as much of it as possible. But definitely agree. I like the stances that they're taking, and I think they've been very open to hearing what folks have to say in the community.
Cool. Well, look, man, I appreciate you taking the time. I know you're super busy and you just got started at Base. I know, we had a couple of hiccups in making this happen, so I'm glad we finally were able to do so. But I'll let you get back to work, and just sort of close by saying, love everything that you've built, sort of, both independently as well as parts of this, this contract work that you've been doing. Like I said, given all of the things that you've produced, I just sort of assumed that you had a lot more experience and we're a lot older. So super bullish on you and everything that you're doing, and looking forward to seeing what you guys are up to at Base.
Thank you, man. Really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me. Big fan of the podcast and what you've been building as well, and excited to just stay in touch.
Awesome. Thank you again. Appreciate it.
Cool.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, man. Take care. How's it going?